what we can do. I really don't know if I'm going to accomplish much, but I'm going to try my best. Waiting here. Okay, YouTube live stream has started, so I'll go to YouTube really quick. I was watching some other broadcasters do the same thing that I'm doing. They were checking on YouTube just to see if they were live. I don't check to see if we're live. I check to turn off the chat because I was watching some other broadcasters. I'm not going to be monitoring it. If my main broadcast was on YouTube, then I would keep the live chat going and just monitor that and see what happens. But since our main broadcast is not there, then I don't monitor it. Let me see here. Oh, I'm going to go. I'm going to go to sermon audio really quick. Got 5,227 news articles open. All right, how do we sound? I'm going to go to sermon audio really quick. I got that. All right. We'll see what we can get accomplished. That's what we're going to try to do. See what we can get accomplished. I'm going to try to, I don't know. I don't even know how I'm going to put all of this together. I've got a basic outline, but I'm going to be doing a lot of improvisation here as well, an impromptu kind of approach, because there's a lot here that I'm still trying to process in real time. Everything will make sense here in a minute. All right, we will begin in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Looking at our world from a theological perspective, this is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is Monday, September the 15th, 2025. It is currently 2:09 p.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from the Theology Central studio located right here in Abilene, Texas. Now, I've just returned from Salem, Massachusetts. And while I was in Salem, once again, I walked the streets of Salem as I do whenever I am there. I walk all over Salem. I've talked before. I feel this connection to Salem. I have a love for it, and I have been a student of everything that happened in Salem in 1692 for years and years and years, and I continue to read and I continue to try to learn. So I just got back from Salem, and I spent a lot of time walking the streets of Salem. And at least for me, I cannot speak for other people because, I've been to Salem enough and watch other people as they walk around and hear maybe the things that they're talking about. At least for me, I still feel the echoes of 1692. I still feel the echoes of a moment in history when fear, when hysteria, and with selective outrage overtook truth. Salem continues to remind me of what happens when communities choose myth over reality, when selective memory guides judgment, and when people are destroyed by narratives that say more about the crowd than they say about truth. And while I was away, America's had kind of its own Salem moment again. America has had a lot of its own Salem moments, starting from Salem itself in 1692. I guess you could say, well, that was before America. But so we'll say since Salem, America's had lots of its own Salem moments. Some of them I've lived through, like the Great Satanic Panic of the 1980s. Sometimes I feel like I'm living right in the middle of another one over and over and over and over again. Now, as many of you know, on September the 10th, 2025, Charlie Kirk was assassinated while speaking at Utah Valley University. The days since that tragedy have not been quiet. In fact, they have been filled with competing stories, selective grief, and I will argue theological confusion. So today I'm going to try to stop as I've returned from Salem and kind of ask, where are we now? Now, I wanted to come back and talk more about Salem. There were some places I visited and got some more history, and I wanted to tell some stories about being in Salem. But I think what I need to do is try to take some of the lessons learned in Salem and try to apply it to this kind of Salem moment that we are currently living in and talk about, well, what occurred on September the 10th and everything that has happened since, maybe utilizing some of the feelings and the emotions and the lessons learned from Salem and what happened there in 1692. Now, if you remember on September the 10th, before I left, because I flew out on September the 11th, on the morning of September the 11th is when I flew out. But if we look back to what I said on September the 10th, 2025, on this broadcast, on the day that the tragedy happened, I turned on the microphone on September the 10th and I went live. And I said just a few things that I want to repeat now. I said, don't rush in any way, shape, or form to speculation. Don't grab onto conspiracy theories. Don't turn tragedy into a platform for agenda or for your agenda or for anyone's agenda. I said, don't gloat in death. And no Christian should rejoice at the murder of anyone, even someone you may disagree with. I said, don't sanctify political figures as saints. The church must not baptize political ideology as if it is the gospel. And I said, beware of misinformation, scapegoating, and escalation. Violence breeds violence, and selective outrage destroys communities. And I reminded us and myself that only Christ redeems. Only his death defines true martyrdom. Only his resurrection offers hopes. And now here I am on September the 15th, and I will say that those warnings have been tested in the days that followed. And I think what we've seen proves just how necessary my warnings were. I think you can look back and go, those warnings were definitely necessary, because look at everything that's happened between September the 10th and September the 15th. So in a minute, I will try to explain where we are now to the best of my ability, but let me explain my trip. So September the 10th, I give that broadcast. I try to process everything that was happening in real time, and I tried to offer all of those warnings. I tried to be thoughtful. I tried to be careful. I tried to avoid wild speculation. I warned against it. I warned people of the misinformation, conspiracy theories. I tried to do all of those things. So on September the 11th, I ended up in the DFW airport. Now, anywhere there was a television, obviously the Charlie Kirk news was everywhere. It was on every television. And I heard some people make some comments here or there, but not too much. But I could tell that it was definitely everyone's attention were on the screens, and you could definitely hear some opinions being formulated. And most of the opinions that I did hear was, well, you could tell if a person was a Republican or if you could tell if a person was a Democrat. You could hear the division already. So I get on the airplane and I flew to Boston on JetBlue, and those planes, they have a screen on every, seat, right? So I could see the screen of the passenger right in front of me, I think to my right. And they were just going, and we had live television available on our the screen. And so they were just going from news channel to news channel to news channel. They just, for the entire flight, 3 hours plus almost 4 hours, that's all they did for 4 hours was watch the Charlie Kirk coverage and about his death and tragedy. And they just would go and they would watch. And if they felt that the news was becoming repetitive, they just went to a different channel, and then they would watch and then they would go. Now, to be fair, they went to multiple news sources. They went from Fox to CNN to MSNBC. I don't even know all the numbers of different ones they went to. But I will be I was glad to see them not just staying with one particular news source. They were trying different ones. They mumbled some things here or there, but nothing too much. Nothing too much was going on. So that kind of happened. And then once I arrived in Salem, finally get to the hotel that evening, it was the flights were delayed. So the flights were delayed. I mean, we were trying to fly out on September the 11th. I know what you're thinking. Why were you trying to fly out on September the 11th? Seems like an odd day to try to fly out. It's just the way everything was working because I was going to Salem for a particular event, my daughter's marriage or my daughter's wedding. So, that's just the way it works. So flights were delayed and we did not end up to the hotel till much later than anyone anticipated. I don't even know what time it was. It was late. 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night. I can't even remember. So immediately after, it was just like, go find food. And then it's just everything just kind of like from that point turned into a blur. I wasn't looking for any coverage about the Charlie Kirk situation at that time. Everything was just moving fast. The only time is I was, wandering around Salem, and here or there I may have heard someone mention it, but most everyone at that. Now, if you don't know anything about Salem, you get to September, basically where we are in September all the way to the end of October. It's like thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people descend upon Salem during this time of year. It has become like, you can't even imagine how many people pour into Salem in October. I mean, every day, the amount of people visiting Salem, it's in the tens of thousands per day that visit Salem during September, especially in October. By the time you get to October the 31st, that place is just shoulder to shoulder. So there was people everywhere. The place was packed. And so, but most people were talking and discussing things about Salem and where they were going. And I did a lot of just walking around. So I would hear some conversations, but most of the conversations I was engaged in is people seemed to perceive that I had some idea of what about Salem. So I was asked a lot of questions, especially at I guess you call it the Witch Memorial. It's right there next to the one of the oldest graveyards in New England. And so they have these benches there, the names of all those who were accused and killed of being a witch. And so they're all there. So when I get there, I always kind of look because people will place little memorials on top of them. Sometimes they get scooted out of the way. So as I go to each one, I will grab things and kind of frame things back. Sometimes people will leave little pieces of paper with a message to the person who was killed. So I will center it. Sometimes they'll leave seashells because obviously Salem is right there, next to basically on the ocean. And so I will set seashells around things. And I just set it up nice and neat because people get pushed out of the way because some people will show up there and they just kind of sit there on the benches, and I always hate that. Sometimes I don't think the people sitting there know even where they're standing. I don't think they even realize where they're standing. So I will go and kind of clean it up and kind of just show honor to each person who was killed. So I was doing that, and so some people will see that, and so they perceive me as some expert. So I'll get asked questions, so I'm answering questions, and no, none of these individuals are buried in the cemetery right here. I know the memorial's right next to the cemetery, but none of them are buried there. The people associated with the witch trials are buried in the cemeteries, the judge, and I can explain who's there. And I can tell them, no, go to Proctor's Ledge. That memorial is much more close to the actual execution of the individuals, and their bodies were basically thrown there. They were not allowed a proper burial because they were supposedly witches. And so I can explain everything. So that's kind of where my conversations, if I had conversations with individuals, that's where that's what occurred. I went to the Dungeon Museum. I went to the Pirate Museum. I just kind of went those different places. So my mind at that point wasn't really thinking about the Charlie Kirk situation. It wasn't. There were times my iPad was connected to Wi-Fi, so I would see all these podcast notifications coming in. Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk. But I was primarily focusing on anything that came from Christian ministries, and it was Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk. A couple of times I was able to check things. I went to the Christian Post. It was like Charlie Kirk article, Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk. I looked on Sermon Audio, started seeing Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk, and I was like, okay, the Christian world is definitely right in the midst of this conversation. But I could not obviously do anything or could not record. So that was September the 11th and 12th, 13th. Everything just was, it was like busyness, activity, everything. And then finally, I'm making my way back home. And then finally I get home and then there's so much information, so much. And I'm just trying to figure out, how do I process all of this? So in a roundabout way, I went from the tragedy, the killing of Charlie Kirk occurring, trying to talk about it in real time, right in the midst of it being a breaking news story, offering warnings, to getting in a car, driving to Dallas, getting on an airplane, going to Salem, and then walking around Salem and leaving, in a sense, modern day America, going to Salem 1692 and reliving the hysteria, the panic, the tragedy that occurred there, showing honor to that, to then stepping back into modern day America, September 2025, with everyone talking about Charlie Kirk. And so it's kind of been an interesting contrast and comparison on how things have occurred. So from my vantage point, as of today, September the 15th, 2025, I feel like that where we are right now, and I'm just kind of stepping back into this, is that 4 narratives seem to be formulating. 4 different narratives appear to be formulating. And I'm not saying by any means I have this all figured out, but this is what I feel like I'm seeing. All right? Since September the 10th, it seems like at least I'll call them 4 dominant narratives. The one that's really dominating, I think, the discussions have emerged within the church and maybe within the nation. I'm kind of more focused on how the church and theological voices are speaking, more so than how the nation is speaking. But we know the political, if you want to look at the political world, you know what it is. If it's Republicans and those who lean right, you know how they're framing it. And if it's Democrats, you know how they're framing it, and those who lean to the left. But the political ideology is just going to be divisive, and it's going to be filled with all of its rhetoric. But how will the church respond? That's always my question, right? During COVID, how can the church respond as a voice of reason, logic, hope, gospel, and in the light of Charlie Kirk? How will the church respond? That's always where I am interested. And time again, I'm usually baffled, confused, bothered, disturbed, and disgusted with how the church responds. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at this, but here seems to be 4 dominant narratives. I think the first is almost a kind of a canonization of Charlie Kirk. Is that a good way of describing him or describing what is occurring? If you look on Sermon Audio and you listen to some pastors, basically Charlie Kirk is being framed as a modern day Stephen. He was killed because of his wisdom and not only because of his wisdom and truth could not be resisted. It's almost gone that way. Charlie Kirk was a modern day Stephen, as described in the book of Acts. And Stephen was killed because they could not resist his truth and wisdom. And Charlie Kirk was killed because they could not resist his truth and wisdom. And it's they killed him. They want to use they don't want to use an individual, but they want to frame it in the light of a whole group or a whole ideology is responsible. They basically have added Charlie Kirk to the Hall of Faith, basically. They placed him alongside missionary martyrs and apostles. His assassination is presented almost as proof of God's sovereignty and raising up new martyrs. See, God will always raise up new martyrs, and almost like Charlie Kirk is there. He's in the Hall of Faith. He should be listed. His name should be placed right there. And a list of other people who died for their faith, died for trying to present the gospel. Now, I think that there should be at least a pause here. Doesn't that kind of reduce then, doesn't that kind of basically reduce gospel martyrdom into political assassination? Stephen died for preaching Christ, crucified. Kirk was killed in the middle of a political debate, political question and answer, political speech. If you equate the two, aren't you sanctifying political ideology of this as if it's the gospel itself? So there's this, let's canonize Charlie Kirk. Let's make him a martyr. Let's put him in the hall of faith. And I don't know about that. Now, I talked about how he may be viewed that way, and I talked about how he would be sanctified and turned into, that was part of my kind of prediction and warning on September the 10th. So that has played out maybe even stronger than I anticipated. I mean, I kind of came back and I was like, whoa, okay. I didn't know how the Christian world would 100% respond, but it's kind of like, Saint Charlie Kirk, let's canonize him now. Let's whatever non-Catholics do when they're declaring someone to be a saint, they don't even have to go through a process. They just make him a saint now. And you better not say anything negative or you will be silenced kind of approach is kind of what I have seen so far. So there's kind of a canonization, a sainthood of Charlie Kirk and a martyr. And I don't know if that's where this should go. I'm a little perplexed that that's kind of where we are on September the 15th. I guess I should have anticipated it. I mean, if you kind of look at how some Christians handled the Salem witch trial, they almost want to canonize some of those Puritans who were responsible for basically leading to the death of innocent people. So I sometimes I'm baffled. It's like if Christians perceive someone to be on their side, then they just immediately will canonize them. And it's sometimes I'm a little confused by that. But okay, that seems to be one clear narrative. I don't think that can be denied. You can get on sermon audio and you can hear sermons equating him with Stephen and listing him with other supposed martyrs. And it's like, that's already clearly a narrative. You can see it on sermon audio. You can see it on the Christian Post. You can see it on a number of Christian websites. I think another dominant narrative seems to be this idea of revivalism. I've seen some Christians, this could spark revival. This means revival. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. All right. Some pastors have said Kirk's death is tragic, but the lesson is that America must repent. They pointed to 2 Chronicles 7:14, calling the nation to prayer and revival. You know where I'm going to have issues here, right? They're going to go to 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. I'm in chapter 6. I believe it's 7:14. I don't want to give you a wrong reference. I'm almost positive. Yeah. And is it 2 Chronicles 7:14? Yes, 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Now, I have many problems with this. Who is this? I'm sorry, hitting the microphone. Who is this specifically referring to? What is going on? If you go back to the context, you can see in verse 1, Solomon is being spoken of there. If you look at verse 5, Solomon is being spoken of there. If you look at verse 7, Solomon is being spoken of right there. And Solomon is talked about in verse 11. Solomon is spoken of in verse 12. And clearly my people here is Israel. If we're going to take the death of Charlie Kirk and then run to 2 Chronicles 7:14, see, this becomes a hermeneutical issue. This becomes once again, I know that's a tragedy and I know people can be upset, but I just get concerned when we just start ripping verses out of context that we're going to apply it to this situation. Now, is there anything wrong with calling America and all of us to repentance? No. Is there anything wrong with calling us to prayer? No. But if you're not careful, you flatten this tragedy into basically a generic revival slogan. I think it just tries to avoid hard questions about martyrdom, politics, and truth. And it simply uses the death as another supposed wake-up call for America, which every time tragedy happens, that's what we do. You know, you just name it. A bad hurricane. It's time for America to, who are called by his name. And, it doesn't matter if it's 9/11. It doesn't matter if it's a hurricane. It doesn't matter. Tragedy after tragedy, death after death gets framed into some kind of, people will write a book. People will release a series that you can purchase. They'll do a conference that you have to pay to get in. And it becomes a way to monetize the tragedy and turn it into a revival slogan. So some ministry can then gain, I don't know. I'm always bothered by, I'm not saying there cannot be an organic, sincere call, but I don't know. It's just, how many tragedies have I lived through and the same talking points are used. And then those same talking points are used until the next tragedy and until the next tragedy. So I think we have this canonization idea of going on. Charlie Kirk is a saint and he should be listed in the Hall of Faith. And second, it's like revival. Okay. I've been hearing about revival my whole life. And I don't know. I get maybe I'm jaded. Maybe I'm skeptical there. I think a third thing has kind of been almost a condemnation that has arisen in some circles. Now, these would be the minority voices. All right. Other voices are kind of approaching this in a radically different perspective. Now, these voices are going to be silenced, drowned out, and they're not going to be well received. But if we're going to talk about the different narratives that have emerged since September the 10th and the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I don't think we can ignore them. All right. So there's a video going around today that's gone viral. And everyone is talking about it. I'm going to play it. You're going to be offended by some of the words said. Now, this was said in a church behind a pulpit. All right. So and I know this is going to come as a shock. Not all Christians, not all those who preach are in agreement on how the Charlie Kirk situation is being handled. Now, this is going to be, you'll call this on the fringe, but it still needs to, because it's gone viral, it was at the very top of the Drudge Report at one point this morning. So I'm going to play this for you. Again, for many of you, you're going to be greatly offended by it. Many of you probably have already seen it, but I can't just talk about the different narratives, at least I include this one. So the first one is canonization. Charlie Kirk is a saint. Second is kind of this, let's turn this into a call for revival. And then third is almost a condemnation of how many in the church are handling it. And it sounded like this.
Charlie Kirk did not deserve to be assassinated. But I'm overwhelmed seeing the flags of the United States of America at half staff calling this nation to honor and venerate a man who was an unapologetic racist and spent all of his life sowing seeds of division and hate into this land. And hearing people with selective rage who were mad about Charlie Kirk but didn't give a damn about Melissa Hortman and her husband when they were shot down in their home, tell me I ought to have compassion for the death of a man who had no respect for my own life. I am sorry But there's nowhere in Bible where we are taught to honor evil. And how you die does not redeem how you lived. You do not become a hero in your death when you are a weapon of the enemy in your life. I can abhor the violence that took your life, but I don't have to celebrate how you chose to live. I am overwhelmed.
Now, that obviously is sparking a lot of controversy. So you go from one extreme, canonization. He belongs in the Hall of Faith. He's a modern day Stephen. He goes from Charlie Kirk debating college students to a martyr, a minister, a hero, to, well, then the other extreme, Charlie Kirk is an unapologetic racist and evil. I mean, like, those are strong extremes, all within the Christian umbrella. Now, I know what some will say, those are, because if you don't like the message, you just say they're no longer a Christian. I get it. But that just shows you, even within Christendom, just in general, and I know many are going to go with the canonization. That's going to be the majority. But there are those voices that are not so going that direction, which means the political division outside the church is becoming prevalent inside the church, which is what I've been warning against forever. Now, you could argue the narrative that's going to kind of go with kind of a condemnation, that this narrative refuses to whitewash or turn Charlie Kirk into a mythical figure. But there's also a danger. In fact, it was even on Fox News. I would have to go find the name of the individual. He said Charlie Kirk was no saint. And he was attacked by even uttering those words. You cannot say that. You cannot say that. And if you pull up some of the quotes Charlie Kirk said in his life, you can't even repeat those. Even if it's his own words, you will be attacked. So at least the condemnation narrative refuses to turn him into some kind of myth or some kind of saint. But there's a danger, because that goes into gloat. It could sound like you're gloating, which is one of the things I warned against. It could argue that as you're condemning those on the right for their selective compassion and empathy, you could be demonstrating the exact same selective compassion and empathy. In other words, if you're mad at those on the right who seem to have no compassion and empathy when someone dies who's on the left, well, then those on the left need to show compassion and empathy when someone dies on the right. But no one wants to show any compassion and empathy because everyone only cares about their own little tribe. And, well, that is tragic. Now, there are a fourth narrative. So the first is this idea of canonization, canonizing Charlie Kirk as to a saint. The second is kind of a revivalistic slogan and turn this into revival. And that's kind of just bizarre to me. I mean, I've heard of Charlie Kirk. I mean, obviously, I knew about him, saw the clips on him debating college kids on a college campus, but I never, when I think of Christianity and the Bible and theology and the gospel and God, I think of Charlie Kirk. When did he become like this famous pastor and minister? It's so weird. He's going to be the thing that sparks revival, not the preaching of God's word, not theology. I'm so confused by that narrative. And then condemnation, well, we heard a little bit of that. A fourth kind of approach is kind of we'll call it pastoral caution. This would be kind of the fourth narrative. This narrative urges kind of a different response. It's trying to tell Christians, hey, let's keep Christ at the center. Let's resist radicalization. Let's not call Kirk a Christian martyr. Let's try to shepherd people through fear and focus on the gospel. And I think maybe this narrative is maybe the most theologically responsible It doesn't canonize Kirk, but it doesn't gloat in his death either. It tries to insist that Christians must remain grounded in Scripture and resist politicizing the pulpit. I think the fourth narrative is kind of this pastoral caution. You can see an example of this on sermon audio. You can find an example of this on sermon audio. Let me see if I can pull it up. You can find an example of this on sermon audio. If you just do a search for Charlie Kirk, let me see if I can find it. You'll get this one. It's called Charlie Kirk. It was published today. It was published today. It's called Charlie Kirk, How Do We Respond Biblically? Charlie Kirk, How Do We Respond Biblically? It's a part of a series called Deliberate Orthodoxy. Shad Pittman from Emmanuel Baptist Church. There's 3 individuals there, and they're talking about it. And I think they you would put them in the category of this kind of fourth narrative of trying to offer some type of pastoral caution. All right. So with the 4 narratives that have emerged while I was in Salem, all right, is canonization. Charlie Kirk is a saint. And there we go. A second is revivalism. This is gonna bring about the church is gonna be revitalized because a political commentator, someone who's political, who debated college students, that revival is going to come through him. It just seems an interesting approach. Condemnation. That's going to be the ones who are going to be against how the church is celebrating this. And then the fourth is pastoral caution. Those seem to be the 4 major narratives. Now, we could get into the narrative. We could offer as a fifth this almost civil war narrative that this is going to spark violence both ways. The right is sick and tired of the left, and they're going to go after the left, and the left is sick and tired of the right. I have seen a lot of this. Basically, a call to arms and ready for more violence. So I don't even want to call that a narrative. I think it's just that's the danger. If you want to say 4 narratives and a danger, the danger is violence breeds violence. It leads to more violence. So I think that's a clear, I don't know if I want to call that a narrative, but those 4 narratives I think are the more dominant ones. Now, I don't think we can ignore, though, those who are kind of going with the condemnation narrative and kind of pushing back against some of this. I don't think we can ignore the accusations and cries of a double standard. When Charlie Kirk was killed, Donald Trump ordered the flags lowered to half staff. From my understanding, he's either already done so or going to award Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom, calling him a giant of his generation. But when Minnesota Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband were assassinated in their own homes just a few months earlier, I don't believe the flags were lowered. I don't believe that occurred. No medals. And from my understanding, Trump didn't even attend the funeral. I believe some Democrats did. I think he was off playing golf at the time. And many people have noticed this, I don't know what you call it, discrepancy, this something just doesn't seem equal here. Many are saying this is selective grief. This is honoring based not on the value of human life, but on the politics of a person's life. Do we value human life, or do we only value human life who happens to either wear red or blue or is a Republican or a Democrat? Is it basically we only honor those who died who are part of our gang, our tribe? Do we value human life? The Bible, I think, in James 2 would warn us against partiality, right? I think Proverbs would kind of warn us not to gloat when our enemies fall. Some may say Ezekiel 18 would remind us that how you died does not sanctify how you lived. And many would say Acts chapter 7 would remind us that true martyrdom belongs to those who die for Christ, not for politics. So where does this leave us? Well, All murder is evil. All lives are valuable. True martyrdom is dying for Christ, not for a cause, not for a platform, and not for a political party. Death does not sanctify life, and selective grief exposes our idols. Those are some of the things I would say of where I am right now. All murder is evil. All lives are valuable. True martyrdom is dying for Christ, not for your cause, not for your platform, not for a political party. And death does not sanctify life, and selective grief exposes our idolatry. And there is rampant idolatry of political ideology within the American church. The American church worships our politicians and over and over and over and over again, especially those on the right. And there are those who are very liberal churches who may do so on the left. Both are wrong. I think we have to reject the canonization of political figures as saints. I think we have to reject the spiritualizing of tragedy and some type of shallow revival slogan. I think we have to reject gloating or selective compassion. And I think we have to reject the radicalization that social media and partisan outrage fuel. I think we have to affirm compassion for Kirk's family, obviously his widow, his children. I think we can affirm constantly, look, we need repentance. I don't know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You need repentance in your life Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday. The world does, because we're in perpetual state of sin. But that's rooted in the gospel. That's rooted in law, gospel, not in political theater. We have to affirm that Christ alone is the Savior, the true martyr, the Redeemer. And I think we have to be honest. America is fractured. America is divided. And the church, I wish the church would not mirror those fractures, but the church does. The division and the fracturing of America outside the church is made manifest inside the church. I mean, in a way, we're standing at a crossroads, right? America has chosen its narrative. Some have chosen the narrative of martyrdom. Some have chosen the narrative of revival. Some have chosen the narrative of condemnation. Some may have chosen the narrative of pastoral caution. Some may have chosen the narrative of extreme political rhetoric that leads to more violence. And I think the church is fracturing in its responses as well. We need to weep. And I think for biblical Christianity, I think the call is clear. Weep with those who weep. Speak the truth without partiality. Refuse to turn someone into some kind of mythical hero, but then don't gloat as well. And that it's only Christ. It's not Charlie Kirk. It's not any political leader. It's not any political party. It's only Christ's death and resurrection that redeems. And it's just in the midst of all of this, there I was in Salem. Salem shows me what happens when fear, when hysteria, when selective outrage overtakes truth. Is this moment any different than all the other Salem-type moments that have occurred in the history of this country? I don't want to repeat the sins of Salem. Let's not canonize. Let's not turn things into myths. Let's not weaponize death. All we can really do is proclaim Christ and Him crucified. That's what we have to do, because it's only Christ's death and resurrection that will redeem. And that's where that's the only thing we know to, I don't even know what else to say or do at this moment in time. It just seems it just continues. And I mean, I know the one thing about society in 2025. as on one hand, there's going to be some voices that are loud, and it's going to feel like this thing's never going to end. But I also know that for many people, they will move on to the next tragedy. They will move on to the next controversy. They will move on to the next thing, and then they will move on to the next thing, because that's what that's what we do as humans. We're bothered, we're outraged, we're upset, we're hurt, we're mad, and then move. Oh, no, look at that. Now I'm upset about that. Oh, wait, it's September the 15th. Where are we going to be September the 24th? September the 25th? October 1st? I don't know. I'll just be more jaded to be more now. I know that there's no going back. The political fracturing of the American church, there's no repairing it at this point. There's just you reach a tipping point, there's no going back, right? I stood while I was in Salem in front of the oldest continuously operating, we'll call it Protestant church in America, in North America. I stood right in front of the church. Now, it's not the building that it was, and it's pretty close to the exact location, but I stood before the church, and I'll probably do an episode about it. I stood before this church. Now, I'm in Salem. Salem was going to be the city on the hill. It was going to be the shining light. It was going to be the city that was going to have pure Christianity. It was going to be remove all of the corruption, and it was going to be a pure church. Puritans they were going to fix everything. And I stood before that church. That was the place where Puritanism, Calvinism, theology was preached and taught. That same church, one of the oldest continuously operating church in North America, is not a Unitarian church. Puritanism is gone. It's a Unitarian church. If you walked by it, you would see the building. If you looked around and saw some of the signs, you probably would be very upset. Many Christians would be greatly appalled at what they see. I believe there's an LGBTQ flag there, Black Lives Matter banner right there in the front. It's the oldest Protestant church in North America, continuously operating. It went from Puritanism to Unitarianism because things fractured slowly but surely. I think the church split in 17. I'd have to look at the date. 17 ultimately after the Salem witch trials, things begin to fall apart. And then because church attendance was falling apart in Salem, they came up with a new covenant to find a way to bring people back to the church, and which ultimately I think led to what ultimately became it moved from Puritanism to Unitarianism. It's a powerful warning of what can happen. And this politicizing of the American church. And I sit back and I'll just leave us with this. I think it would be very fair to say. There's lots of quotes by Charlie Kirk, and some are not fully in context. Some are misattributed to him. And so there's a lot of fraudulent quotes going around. So I'm not going to take any one quote and try to not be fair to the context. But I think it would be pretty fair to say that Charlie Kirk very much was calling for kind of almost a Christian nationalistic ideology. I think it's pretty fair to say. And if the church is turning him into a hero of the faith and a martyr and canonizing him as a saint of the Protestant world, is his ideology of Christian nationalism now going to grow in the aftermath of this tragedy? If there's a revival that emerges from the death of Charlie Kirk, will it be a revival to pure biblical Christianity, theologically sound and very much rooted in law and gospel and Christ crucified for us? Or if a revival does emerge, will it be a revival for a Christianity that is politicized and a Christianity that is more in line with Christian nationalism than historical biblical Christianity? Is this going to be a revival of a politicized church or a revival of a church that says enough with the politics, let's get back to Christ and Him crucified? Let's get away from this Christian nationalistic dream and let's get back to preaching and teaching. I think it will go with the politicized Christian nationalist revival. That's where I think, if we're going to see a revival, that's where I think it's going to go, if you want my prediction. I left on September the 11th. I come back. Here I sit on September the 15th, and I don't even know how to process all that I have seen. I tried my very best to articulate the narratives that I've seen. I've given you what my feelings are, where I think things are headed. I did my best to try to put that together in a way that makes some kind of sense. I'm still trying to process it all, and we will see. Slowly but surely, we have to get back to the other things we need to do, right? Other things we need to talk about. But I felt like if I left talking about Charlie Kirk to just come back and just not even ignore it, or not even address it and just ignore it, would leave kind of a gap in whatever I do. So I felt like I had to kind of provide a bookend here. Time will tell, just like my predictions on September the 10th. Time will tell if I'm perceiving things accurately. And by no means am I claiming that my perceptions are accurate here. I mean, I processed September the 10th in real time. I was trying to do all of that in real time. And now I'm processing today, September the 15th, everything that occurred from the 10th to the 15th, basically trying to gather information while I was away from much of it while it was occurring. So my perception is not one that I feel like maybe there's things I'm missing, and I'm very much admitting that. So there you go. I wish I had some kind of words of encouragement. It's a very volatile time. I think we can all agree with that. Thanks for listening, and God bless.